What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Colorado Buffaloes are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Colorado did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Colorado. You look at my projection, it was not really that high for Colorado at 4-8 overall, but this was just based off of the last year projection and also just based off of how they finished in Deion Sanders' first year as the head coach. They were 4-8 in his first year as the head coach, so I actually wasn't really that high on Colorado. Didn't know how good they were going to be in 2024 based off of what they did in Deion Sanders' first year, but I did change my prediction. When they came to the Big 12, I feel like Colorado had a really big chance to have a big turnaround, but they were predicted to go 7-5 according to my prediction, but in the regular season they were 9-3. So Colorado did a lot better than my projection, definitely way better than my projection, but just 2 games up ahead of my prediction. So yeah, they went 9-3 in the regular season, but 9-4 overall. If you count their bowl game loss to BYU, yeah, they got blown out in that game, but it was a great season last year for Colorado, especially after a 4-8 season in their final year, of course, in the Pac-12 and heading into their first year in the Big 12. This was the schedule from last season for Colorado, and again, they were 9-3 with this schedule. First off, you look at who they played in the non-conference. They actually had a pretty tough non-conference schedule. They had to play North Dakota State, the top FCS team from last year. They won the FCS championship against Montana State not just too long ago. And then they also played Nebraska out of the Big Ten. They lost that game. It wasn't really a close game whatsoever after beating them in 2023. And then they also played rival Colorado State. So they beat North Dakota State and Colorado State both in these non-conference, but yeah, Nebraska actually was a really tough game, and Nebraska actually was kind of a bit average, for the rest of the season. So even though Colorado lost this game, they were still able to go 9-3. And then you take a look at their conference schedule in the Big 12. First off, you look at who they played at home. They played Baylor, Kansas State, Cincinnati, Utah, and Oklahoma State. So you just look at this Big 12 schedule last year. You look at also the away schedule. They played UCF, Arizona, Texas Tech, and then also Kansas on the road. So they had 5 home games last year in the Big 12, and then, of course, had 4 away games in the Big 12. And yeah, this schedule was kind of tough in my opinion. You look at Kansas State. They lost that game at home. That was a tough loss there. They lost that game by 3. But, you look at the rest of the schedule here. The teams that we thought were going to be really good last year ended up not being really good as we expected. Arizona ended up not being as good as we expected. Same thing for Kansas, even though they lost to the Jayhawks. But Oklahoma State ended up being the worst team in the Big 12, and then Utah really came close to being the worst team as well in the Big 12. Now, Baylor and Texas Tech were 2 very surprise teams, but they ended up beating both of those teams. So, yeah, just looking at this schedule last year, it ended up kind of being pretty easy for them because most of these teams in the Big 12 ended up not being really good last season. So what's the schedule look like for 2025? Here is that schedule for the Colorado Buffaloes coming up for this season. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Colorado plays in the non-conference for this season. So it's kind of a favorable non-conference schedule this time for Colorado. They will play all of their non-conference games at home this year instead of having playing the 2 of them from last season. They will play Georgia Tech, though. That's a pretty interesting non-conference game. They will play the Yellow Jackets here out of the ACC. That should be a pretty exciting matchup. And then they play Delaware, probably the easiest non-conference game on this schedule. And then you got Wyoming out of the Mountain West. So instead of not playing Nebraska and Colorado State, which I'm going to miss that rivalry, to be honest, for this season. I kind of wish they continued the rivalry because of Deion Sanders being there for Colorado. But, yeah, Georgia Tech, Delaware, and Wyoming, this is a pretty easy non-conference schedule for the Buffaloes. Yeah, Georgia Tech's going to be pretty tough. Wyoming might be a little bit tough, but, yeah, Colorado should probably be favored in those 2 other games. And then Georgia Tech probably is a pretty even matchup. So that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now move on to the home schedule in the Big 12. They will play 4 home games in the conference this year. They will play BYU, Iowa State, Arizona, and Arizona State. So I think this is a pretty favorable home schedule here for the Colorado Buffaloes at home. I think this is going to be a pretty favorable schedule for them at home this year. You got BYU, of course. You didn't have to play them in the regular season last year, but you played them in a bowl game, so that'll be like a revenge game there for the Buffaloes. And then you got Iowa State, another team that you did not beat in the regular season last year. Arizona, you beat them last year on the road. Arizona State, I don't think they met each other in the regular season either. So 3 out of these 4 opponents, you did not play each other in the regular season last year. And this year you're playing them. And the good news is they're all 3 at home. So I do like this home schedule here for Colorado. I think it sets up pretty well because 3 out of these 4 teams that you're seeing here, BYU, Iowa State, and Arizona State, those are all going to be really tough games. But again, the good news is they're all 3 at home. Let's now move on to the away schedule here in the Big 12. They will play 5 road games this year instead of 4. They will play at Houston, at TCU, at Utah, at West Virginia, and then at Kansas State. So this is a pretty tough road schedule for Colorado. Houston is a pretty winnable game. I would say probably Utah is also a winnable game just of how they finished from last season, but TCU on the road, that'll of course be a rematch. That'll be pretty interesting of a matchup there. You remember TCU, of course, lost to this Colorado team a couple of years ago when Colorado was still in the Pac-12, but this time they will meet as Big 12 opponents. So yeah, that'll be a pretty exciting matchup. And then West Virginia and Kansas State, those are tough games to play on the road. Same thing for Utah. So yeah, this is kind of a tough road schedule, but like I said, in the Big 12, any Big 12 game is pretty winnable. It doesn't really matter what game you're playing, either if it's on the road or at home. Yeah, the Big 12 is very hard to project and also to predict when you predict like a lot of these games. So that's your away schedule. Let's now move back to the schedule here and go game by game now for the Buffaloes. Again, they'll play Georgia Tech here on August 30th to start out the season. That'll be a home game there for the Buffaloes. Then they'll play Delaware after that here on September 6th. Then they open up Big 12 play on the road at Houston on September 13th. Then back at home for that non-conference game against Wyoming on September 20th. Then they play BYU at home on September 27th. Then on the road at TCU on October 4th. Then back at home against Iowa State here on October 11th. They get their first bye week before playing on the road at Utah on October 25th. So their bye week doesn't actually come until late October. So they have to play a full stretch of games there from August 30th all the way to October 11th. Yeah, that's a long stretch there before they get their first bye. And then after that, it's a home game against Arizona on November 1st. Then they'll play on the road at West Virginia on November 8th. And then they also get another bye week here before playing a big game against Arizona State. I think that's a pretty good spot for a bye week. You're playing against the Big 12 champions from last year, and yeah, they do get that game at home, and they also get a bye week before playing this game. Yeah, that game will be on November 22nd, and then they close things out on the road at Kansas State on November 29th. So looking at this schedule, it's pretty tough, but it's not really that tough compared to last year in my opinion. Again, you get some big games at home like BYU, Iowa State, and Arizona State, but you got to go on the road to play Kansas State, West Virginia. Those will be pretty tough games, and same thing for TCU and Utah and Houston. Those are definitely like trap games in my opinion. So let's now get a projection here for Colorado for 2025 based on how tough this schedule is. Again, this is the scale I've been using here for my projections. If it's a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much counted as an automatic loss. Your 20% games in the orange will be games where Colorado will be a double-digit underdog. 40% games in the yellow will be games where Colorado will be a clear underdog in by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points, and then your 50-50 games, of course, will stay in the white. Games in the purple, though, are going to be games where Colorado will be favored by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points, and then your 80% games here in the blue, those are games where Colorado will be favored by double digits, and then your 99% games in the green, those are pretty much your automatic wins. So we'll start with the easy wins here for Colorado, and I just got one game on here that's in the green, and that's Delaware here on September 6th. Colorado has no business to lose this game. It would definitely be a big shock if they were to lose to Delaware, to be honest, but if it was like another FCS team, like for example South Dakota State or Montana State or North Dakota State, that game would probably be in the blue, but this game is definitely in the green. I don't think Delaware is a better team than North Dakota State, to be honest. And that game is definitely in the green. So I think Colorado will be favored by a big margin in this one. It's not a guaranteed win, but we count them as wins in this projection. So that game is definitely over that 95 to 99% mark. And then we now move on to the blue, where I think Colorado is going to be favored here by double digits. So by about a couple of touchdowns, 10 to 14 points. I think you also got a couple of them on here. Not a couple of them, but just a couple. Wyoming and Arizona. I think Colorado will be favored in both of these games by at least a couple of touchdowns, by 10 to 14 points. Again, I know Wyoming should be in the green, but this is a pretty good group of 5 team out of the Mountain West, so I will put it in the blue just for right now. And, based off of last year, not based off of last year, but these group of 5 teams can really compete. We've seen a lot of group of 5 teams actually pull off upsets against Power 4 teams, and that's happened in the past. So yeah, Wyoming is definitely capable of pulling off the upset. If it was on the road at Wyoming, I would definitely put it in the purple, but this is also counted as a win. It's not a guaranteed win, just like the green game, but it's also counted as a win in this projection. Same thing for Arizona. I get it. Arizona is a Big 12 opponent. It should be in the purple, but based off of how Arizona finished last year, Colorado playing at home, that's the reason why Colorado is a double-digit favorite. So I think both of these games, Colorado will be favored in both of them by about a couple of touchdowns, I should say, by 10 to 14 points. And then we go to the games where I think Colorado's going to be favored by at least a touchdown, 6 or 7. I also got a couple of them, and they're both on the road, Houston and Utah. So I think Colorado will be favored in both of these games by 6 or 7 points. These are definitely trap games. Houston is definitely a really big trap game in my opinion. That's early in the season. It kind of gives you the early feel of the season before you're going into the rest of the year. Yeah, Houston, we don't really know how good they're going to be. Same thing for Utah. Both of these teams, had really tough seasons last year, but Houston could be improved. They have a second-year head coach, so they could be improved from last year. And in Utah, they're usually a consistent program throughout the history of college football, and they definitely could be that consistent team in the Big 12. So yeah, Utah definitely will be a really tough one because it's on the road. That's the reason why both of these games are in the purple, is because they're both on the road. So yeah, Colorado I think will still be favored, but not by much, 6 or 7 points. And then you look at the rest of the schedule, I think these are all 50-50 games the rest of the way. Look, Georgia Tech, I know Colorado should be probably favored against them. I think they will be probably by like 4 or less points, but that's the reason why it's a 50-50 game. I think it's just a pretty even matchup, in my opinion. These are 2 well-coached teams, and then BYU, TCU, Iowa State, West Virginia, Arizona State, and Kansas State. These are all pretty even matchups here for Colorado in the Big 12. So what does the projection come out to be here for Colorado for 2025 based on how tough this schedule is? Well, it actually comes out to 9-3. So we count that one green game as a win, and then you also count the blue games as wins. You average out the purple games at 60%, and then you average out all these 50-50 games at 50%, and that does give you a projection of 9-3. So I think, you can probably say they can win at least 3 out of the, 7 50-50 games, or they could probably win at least 4 out of the 7 50-50 games. Let's say they put it that way. And then they probably slip up in one of these purple games here against Houston or Utah. That could possibly happen, and that's how they can probably go 9-3. And of all the Big 12 teams I've done so far, all the projections have come out to be at 9-3 here for these Big 12 teams. Again, it's just really hard to project the Big 12 right now, and it's also hard to make an early prediction on all these games in the Big 12 and see who's going to win it. Like I said, the Big 12 is going to be wide open again. Any team can win this conference, and we, of course, saw that last year with Arizona State being a big underdog, and they came out of nowhere and just won the Big 12. So, yeah, 9-3 was what the projection is for Colorado. I think worst-case scenario is probably 8-4, best case 10-2. So that is my projection for Colorado for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and also give me your thoughts about Colorado's schedule. Is it tough or not so tough? Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.